I'm James Olley, joined by Mark Ogden and Liverpool correspondent Beth Lindop in the studio. How are you both?
I'm good, yeah.
Not too bad, thank you.
I'm impressed that Beth were in black and white the day after Liverpool lost to Newcastle in the Carabao Cup final.
On camera. Yeah.
No, I think it's a tribute to Eddie Howe's boys.
Yeah,
I think it was an emotional day at Wembley yesterday. I think the Dan Burns story is one of the stories of the ages, and I don't think Beth enjoyed it too much, but you know.
Yeah, I mean, Mark was very enthusiastic about Newcastle's victory.
You shocked me.
Yeah, but thoroughly deserved, you've got to say, from their perspective. Played very well. Liverpool were just not at the races, I don't think, and it's been quite nice over the past sort of 24 hours being around the city. It's just Newcastle fans absolutely everywhere, isn't there? And was speaking to a few people in my hotel last night, and just people who've been watching them for years and years. And one guy said to me, he thought he'd be dead before they won another trophy. So you see what it means to them, and yeah, fully deserved on and off the pitch yesterday.
Very diplomatic, very diplomatic. Well done. No Rob Dawson in the studio this week, but we will get him on the show later on.
Okay, so we start with England. It's Thomas Tuchel's first 2 games as England head coach, England manager, this week against Albania and Latvia. So, James, you were at the press conference last week, his first press conference, or his first squad press conference. So, there were 1 or 2 predictably tricky questions about national anthems and players that he's recalled. So, how do you think he handled it last week? Yeah,
well, I mean, his English is flawless, really. I mean, so good that he's able to laugh and joke and use a turn of phrase that you don't always associate with foreign managers when they're speaking in English. And I mean, just it's sort of incidental of nothing. One of the German crews asked him, it must have been a surprise for Jordan Henderson to receive the phone call. So when you said, "Hi, it's Thomas Tuchel," what did he say? And he said, "Hello, it's Jordan Henderson." And I just thought, I just really like that. But he's, having seen what he had to deal with at Chelsea, and asking him questions about, sanctions and war in Ukraine and, the club being put up for sale and all this kind of unprecedented stuff. And he handled all of that so well. This, by comparison, was almost a walk in the park for him. So, yeah, very good, very authoritative, very engaging.
He's a really good communicator, and I suppose he's got big shoes to fill, because Gareth Southgate handled those type of questions, as you mentioned with Thomas Tuchel at Chelsea, in his stride, didn't he? That was every press conference. It would be, what is Gareth Southgate's view on this world crisis today? So at least he's got that in his.
Well, but what Gareth had to do really was present the FA's position on things, and I think what the FA are trying to do, and have acknowledged in appointing Thomas Tuchel, is that they can't rely on him to do that, because he's not steeped in the culture. He's not, as eloquent as he is. He's not. I think Gareth Southgate spent an awful lot of time thinking about these bigger picture issues, and I don't think Thomas Tuchel does. I think he's only focused on the football, and so I think you're going to see a bit more of Mark Bullingham and maybe the chair as well, Debbie Hewitt, to really present the FA's position on the bigger picture stuff, so he can be left to the football.
But on leaving it to the football, should we actually care if he sings the national anthem or not? Do we care?
It doesn't bother me. I mean, I think there's a certain section of people who link that, probably overplay it to the idea of patriotism and passion and, wanting to do everything for your country to win. I don't know about you guys, but it's a nonsense.
Really absolute nonsense. We were at Wembley yesterday, and obviously the Liverpool fans booed the national anthem. That's a different matter, but to suggest that an England manager has to sing the national anthem because everybody in the country wants them to sing it is not true. And it's just, I don't know. I'll bite my tongue what I really think about it.
Yeah, I think obviously being from Merseyside, there is a very different view to probably a lot of the country in terms of the national anthem and what it represents and what it stands for, and everyone's entitled to that opinion. I personally I'm pretty indifferent when it comes to the national anthem. I don't really believe in booing it, but if that's what you want to do, fine. But in terms of singing it, it has absolutely no bearing on his ability to manage a football team. And, look at the criticism that Gareth Southgate got over the years, some of it warranted, some of it not. And he was probably as patriotic as they come. So I'm sure that if Tuchel is able to deliver on the pitch, then talk of the national anthem will be long forgotten.
And also, I just reminded that Jurgen Klinsmann, when he was USMNT coach and they played Germany, he sang both. So
can you imagine if Tuchel did that? I mean, that's great, but imagine if Thomas Tuchel sang the German national anthem. I dread to think what some sections of our fan base would think about that. But anyway, let's move on to the football. His first squad is, it was a surprise to see some of the names. I mean, Jordan Henderson back, Marcus Rashford. I think both a surprise to me, but Jordan Henderson, a massive surprise. I mean, first of all, he'll be 36 when the World Cup comes around. He's not been anywhere near the squad for a long time, and I don't think he's had a particularly great season at Ajax. So
I was just looking at the numbers. So the last 8 games, he's played a total of 158 minutes for them. So he's not playing regularly. He's not particularly in form. But I think what we're seeing here is, and Tuchel said it himself, the World Cup countdown starts now. They've got 6 camps, which is 60 days. He's only contracted through to the World Cup next year. He's only thinking about that. And I think you're seeing this in this first squad. He's squad building already for those finals.
So why waste a place on Jordan Henderson?
Because I think he's going to take him.
Really? At 36?
I think there's every chance that Henderson will go, because what he's already looking at is squad blend, squad dynamic. It reminded me, the squad to somebody, one of the colleagues said this, and I think they're right. It reminded me a bit of the Euro 2020 squad, because I don't know if you remember this. This is a tough question for you both, but I'm going to ask it. Steve Holland, Gareth Southgate's assistant, said there was one player who was their player of the tournament at Euro 2020. It was Conor Cody. And he didn't kick a ball.
No, you're going to take Conor Cody to the World Cup because he's a good lad. He's a good lad, Conor Cody, and he's a decent Premier League defender. But the Jordan Henderson thing, he left Liverpool, nearly 2 years ago now, because he wasn't going to play. Now, 2 years on after being in Saudi Arabia and the Netherlands, and came short of, nearly went to Monaco in the window. It's ludicrous to think he's going to be at the World Cup in 18 months' time.
I suppose the thing is, in any squad, I mean, how big will the squad be? 26. There's always going to be a handful of players who don't go on the pitch, regardless of who you're taking. So maybe he's got that view, and he thinks what he'll be able to contribute as a leader. And, having watched him for Liverpool for a decade, he is a fantastic leader. There can be no disputing that, and maybe he just feels like what he brings is better than taking a young player who probably won't get on the pitch anyway. But then I do sort of take the point in the sense of, there's a lot of young players who haven't got a lot of experience at international level, and how are they ever going to get experience when you've got players like Henderson, who is, he was past his prime in his final season at Liverpool, and as Mark said, he's only sort of declined since then, really. So it's a strange decision.
Well, it is, but I think it's also informed by what's gone before. We know he had a handover with Lee Carsley. I suspect that he's also aware of the issues that there were in the England camp in the summer, which is the first time really Gareth Southgate had to deal with that in his 8 years, that there were issues internally. And I wonder whether he's looking at people like Henderson. And I think with Rashford, I think Rashford's quite lucky to get in. I know he's been bright, and I can see if you're thinking, well, could he play that kind of impact role off the bench, 20 minutes in a group game or a knockout game if you need him? Maybe, but
he's still not scored a goal for Villa yet.
4 assists in all comps, no goals. So he's not exactly tearing it up there, but I wonder whether he's looking at him and thinking, well, if there are question marks about his attitude, and we all know he's been criticised for that the last few weeks and months, one of the reasons why he ended up leaving Man United on loan, whether he's thinking, all right, well, let's take a look at him, let's give him one camp, let's see if he's committed. And I thought it was really significant, actually, when he was talking about Rashford, he was talking about the work he does without the ball. And he needs to keep that up, and he needs to press, and he needs to be maintaining that kind of diligence and that professionalism, because a lot of that is people forget all that side of it. They think of Rashford as what he can do on the ball, but I think that reveals what he really is trying to explore in calling up Rashford for this camp.
During December and January, when Marcus Rashford was looking for a club, I was told that he really wanted to get away because he felt that he could get in Tuchel's squad, because he said, I was told that Tuchel tried to sign him when he was at Chelsea and at PSG. So he's obviously a fan, but as Beth said, he's not scored yet. And I think the biggest winners of Marcus Rashford getting the England squad are Man United, because it means that their value for him might actually remain as high as it is. But he's not doing it at Villa. Just on the midfielders, by the way, James, I've just made a very quick note on my notepad here. Kobbie Mainoo, Morgan Gibbs-White, Jude Bellingham, Declan Rice, Curtis Jones, Adam Wharton. That's 6 midfielders. I mean, how many would he take to World Cup, and which one of those would Jordan Henderson dislodge?
Well, probably Adam Wharton.
And have I missed anybody off that list?
But yes, you're putting me on the spot, but I feel like there is one more. But I mean, look, he could take all of them. I mean, I'm trying to think how many Gareth took to the Euros. I mean, you could take, the thing is, in a 23-man squad, it would be a harder decision. Yeah. But I think with 26, you probably could take Henderson and everyone you just mentioned there.
Maddison, maybe.
Yeah, maybe. Well, I think Maddison's got a lot to do. He wasn't particularly complimentary about Maddison at the squad announcement, but no, I mean, look, I think there's definitely an element of he's picking players that he's liked for a long time. You think about Kyle Walker, who obviously he tried to sign Kyle Walker, and Walker has left City, fallen from grace.
Another one.
Reece James, he's only started 14, I think it's 14 games or 14 appearances this season. Absolutely loved Reece James when he was at Chelsea. He was on best football he's ever played in his life, Reece James, under Thomas Tuchel as a wing back. But is he really in on merit at the moment? Probably not. And even you could argue Harry Kane, retaining him as captain, don't think there's any doubt he should be in the squad, but we all, what kind of debate did we have after the Euros final about whether Kane should really still be leading the line for England? Is he an untouchable in this squad?
Well, he is, because nobody's emerged. Nobody's emerged to threaten him. Ollie Watkins hasn't really kicked on, has he, in terms of saying, I want to be the number one England striker. And I think Harry Kane is still the best option. And he was poor at the Euros. I mean, there's no escaping that. And he's playing for Bayern Munich, and you can debate all day long whether the Bundesliga is as strong and as relentless as the Premier League, so maybe playing there doesn't really kind of give you full indication of how good Harry Kane is at the highest level. But as it stands right now, he scored 30 plus goals for Bayern this season. There's nobody who can touch him. And that is, yes, he's not the player he was in terms of the England team, but he still scores lots of goals, so you have to retain him, I think, at that level. It's hard to find somebody right now who's coming along to put him under pressure.
I also think that the whole stripping him of the captaincy thing, can you imagine what a massive furore that would be? And I'm not saying that he wouldn't be right to do that, because maybe there are other players who might be better suited at this moment in time. But, spoke about the national anthem and it should really be a non-story, but it's been blown up into this big thing, and the whole Harry Kane thing would be as well. So you almost sort of think, is it worth the hassle of
no, you're right. If you're on an 18-month contract, if you were on a 4-year deal, then you might think, well, actually, I'm building a new squad here. I'm really going to try and kick things on. Whereas I think, he talked at the press conference about wanting to create a club feel, and I think people have got to get it out of their heads that he's not going to pick the 26 best players. He's just not going to do that. He's going to build a squad where he thinks, and I'm not. This is not me advocating for Jordan Henderson to go to the World Cup, because I wouldn't take him. But I can see the argument for saying, well, you don't just pick 26 superstars. It doesn't work. We've seen squads, other countries go to World Cups and implode before. You could argue it. You could argue the last foreign manager that England had, Sven-Göran Eriksson, did that. And he was trying to shoehorn the most highly sort of regarded, lauded players into a team, and it didn't work. The balance was never right.
The one thing we always criticised Gareth Southgate for, and I think correctly, was that he never really kind of did anything bold, thought outside the box. He was very kind of safe. And I think, for me, we're going to talk about Dan Burn now. The Dan Burn selection, I think, shows the Tuchel X factor, because, Dan Burn, I don't think any of us would have predicted Dan Burn was getting the England squad. But first of all, he scored a brilliant goal for Newcastle in the Carabao Cup final with that header, one of the best headers I've ever seen.
That one in there,
but if you've got Dan Burn in your squad at a World Cup, he's 6'7". We saw the threat he poses from set pieces, and he's a brilliant lad. He's 32, making his England debut. Dan Burn at a World Cup could be that kind of X factor that makes the difference. I'm not saying he's going to win you the World Cup, but if you're in a quarter-final or semi-final, you've got 20 minutes to go, you need a goal, and he comes on, that is going to put the opposition under a lot of unease. So what do you make of the Dan Burn?
If 6'7" was enough to get you in a World Cup squad, I would have gone by now. It would have happened.
Who is taller, you or Dan Burn?
We're the same height. Yeah. So I look at him and I think that could have been me.
Yeah, but he can play left back, he can play centre half, and we haven't got. Well, we've got good left backs, but they never fit. Ben Chilwell, Luke Shaw. So Dan Burn, obviously, we're a long way from a World Cup, but can you see that? You can see the value that he has.
I can, but then at the same time, the only thing that Tuchel was particularly guarded about at the press conference is how the team was going to play. He didn't want to say whether they were going to set up with wing backs or a back four, or if they were going to be high press, or how they were going to go about it. But I don't think Dan Burn starts in a high press team with 3 centre backs, does he?
No. But he's an option. That's what he's an option player.
Yeah, and I think there'll be. You imagine he's obviously new in the role. You imagine there'll be a degree of experimentation, given how easy we expect the qualification matches to be. With all respect to the teams that England are playing, but it doesn't fit with. It certainly doesn't fit with the Thomas Tuchel Chelsea side that I covered. And I am sort of interested to see just how much experimentation there is, and whether, because Dan Burn would make perfect sense if you were going to be sort of more of a counter-attacking team and you were going to try and stay compact, and he's got to solve the perennial 2 England problems, which is that their centre-backs aren't strong enough and they don't keep the ball well enough.
But left-sided defenders are always a bonus. And a left-sided defender is very good in the air at set pieces.
And I think, I thought it also was revealing that he essentially hinted pretty strongly that Lewis Hall would have been in the squad had he been fit. because I don't think Miles Lewis-Skelly would have made it otherwise, because he's sort of in praising Miles Lewis-Skelly, who has had a fantastic season and arguably deserves his place, but he has effectively said, well, he's brilliant, but we've got a load of injuries and we haven't got anyone who can play left back, so we've brought him in. So I think had Lewis Hall been available, we might not have seen both Dan Burn and Lewis-Skelly.
Beyond sort of the World Cup in 2026, if Tuchel doesn't continue, will there be a real pressure then for the next manager who comes in to be English?
Well, I mean, I was at St George's Park last week doing part of the UEFA Pro License media training, which we'll chat about in a bit. But I was speaking to a couple of people who were telling me that the FA, from the very top, from Mark Bullingham, the CEO, down, are determined to identify a homegrown coach or internal candidate to be Thomas Tuchel's successor, whenever that is. I think we all expect that to be after the World Cup. I think I'd be surprised if he carries on. So there's real pressure now within the FA to find basically an England manager that is English. And it's not easy because there aren't many obvious candidates. But I think obviously Eddie Howe was already very high on the list, but I think he put himself to the top by winning a trophy. No Englishman had won a major trophy since 2008. Harry Redknapp in the FA Cup. So by winning a trophy, Eddie Howe becomes, I imagine, the top choice. But how much would it cost to get him out of Newcastle? Does he want to leave Newcastle? Would he want to leave Newcastle? There's lots of questions there to answer about Eddie Howe, but I think there is a real pressure now within the FA and the system that's been set up to develop coaches. Because one of the real kind of issues for the English game is that, it's the best league in the world in terms of competitiveness and profile. The England team always kind of expects to do well at tournaments. We've got great players, Harry Kane, Jude Bellingham, some of the top players in the world, but we just don't produce English coaches. No Englishman has ever won the Premier League, which is, I can't imagine any other top league in the world without a homegrown or domestic coach winning it. So there's real pressure now for this coaching system at the FA to, give its money's worth really and find a coach.
Wasn't Eddie Howe the first English domestic trophy winner since Harry Redknapp?
Yeah, 2008, Portsmouth FA Cup.
Yeah. That's 17 years. That's remarkable.
I know. And, the FA have been, a good 15 years now, putting lots of money and resources into developing their coaches. Now, there's a lot of English coaches around, but they haven't really cracked the top level. Graham Potter got the Chelsea job and didn't succeed for a variety of reasons. Some not in his hands, some, down to himself. Beyond that, it's really... Frank Lampard and Steven Gerrard have had big jobs but not really kicked on.
Do you think, though, that there's a part of that is more of a social thing from an English perspective, in terms of, in this country, are we too quick to tear people down and sort of want to see them fail rather than...
There's factions.
Yeah. Because I think, Steven Gerrard, Frank Lampard, this country is so partisan when it comes to its football. There's fans all over the country who wouldn't want to see those players necessarily do well as coaches. It's
I suppose Gerrard, Lampard, Wayne Rooney, they probably get jobs bigger than they probably deserve for their inexperience, and then they get fired quicker than others, but because it goes away too quickly. So look, Steven Gerrard's first job, he was successful at Rangers, he won a league, and then he made the wrong choice at Aston Villa, didn't work for him, and he's ever since Unai Emery's kind of shone the harsh light on Steven Gerrard. Frank Lampard is bouncing back at Coventry. I think he's come through the system as well, but obviously I think there's only two Premier League coaches that actually went through the English FA's system of pro license. That was Graham Potter and Kieran McKenna. So I'm not saying the FA wants, preferably they would want a St George's Park trained coach, but that would restrict them to two, candidates. But Eddie Howe did his coaching badge with the Irish FA in Belfast, so but that won't rule him out. But can you, in 18 months' time, probably less, isn't it? We're probably talking 15 months when the World Cup finishes in America. Right now, could you see anybody other than Eddie Howe being the English candidate?
Unless Graham Potter... I know from conversations I've had that had Southgate walked away a couple of years earlier, basically before Graham Potter took the Chelsea job, I think the FA had him pretty firmly in their sights. So I think if Potter can revive his fortunes at West Ham, and you would think he would be probably a lot easier to get out of West Ham than Eddie Howe might be out of Newcastle, then I could see him emerging as a viable option. But it's interesting that the names you both mentioned there, obviously Wayne Rooney, Lampard, Gerrard, they're getting jobs because of their playing careers. Yeah. We look at Tuchel wasn't a great player, Jurgen Klopp wasn't a great player, right? Pep Guardiola, you could argue, is an exception to that. But where are the sort of average English players who are coming through, the thinkers? of their generation who are coming through to become these top coaches? Why are we just relying on the sort of star names of the past to suddenly become, turn it into management?
I've spoken to quite a few former players who are in the 40s now, and they really, really can't get jobs. They've got all the qualifications. The UEFA Pro license with the FA costs £13,700. It seems expensive, but I guess, you compare it to a university degree, it's not that expensive, especially if you're a professional in that top level of the game. But there's a belief or a sense, or maybe it's a perception or a kind of a paranoia, that English coaches find it harder to get jobs at that level, Championship, League One level, because you look at the Championship now, it's populated by coaches from Spain, from Austria, from overseas, basically, from Germany. English coaches find it very hard to get jobs in the Championship, which, they have to earn the right, but because of the influx of sporting directors, who many of them are, again, Spanish or German, that they go for people that they know. So the opportunities for middle-of-the-road journeyman so-called English footballers to get jobs are diminishing. And if you start at League Two, it's really hard to get to League One, the Championship, because all of a sudden, somebody told me this a while back, if you're a Premier League footballer and you take your first job in League Two, you're no longer a Premier League footballer, you're a League Two manager. And it's hard to make that step up. So to get the right opportunities, maybe the English coaches have to be a bit braver and start and look for jobs abroad. Graham Potter did that, but work in Germany, work in France, work in the Netherlands to try and build your experience and be successful that way. Because if you're waiting for a job in the English game right now, you've either got to be, as you say, a celebrated former player, or you've got to get yourself to the top level by winning promotions with the clubs from the lower leagues. It's hard. I
think part of the issue is as well, though, we talk about the Premier League being the best league in the world, but it's populated obviously by coaches from overseas, and a lot of them are playing with a philosophy that's been brought over by Pep Guardiola, really. I mean, you go all the way down the leagues, so many teams now are trying to play in that Guardiola-esque way, which I suppose you would say is the Spanish sort of the tiki-taka kind of model of football, brand of football. What is the brand of English football? And also, if Eddie Howe were to take the England job, would people think the way that he played football was exciting enough for England? Because that was a lot of the criticism that was levelled at Southgate, wasn't it?
It's not front foot enough.
It's not front foot. So then, you have to sort of make a sacrifice somewhere. Do you sacrifice that by bringing in, a Tuchel, a coach from overseas, and let them implement their philosophy? Or do you want an English brand of football, but then what is that identity?
You need a personality as well. I mean, I think the Lee Carsley experiment kind of showed that what that was shining light on Graham Potter, really, in the sense that would Graham Potter have the personality to handle being the England coach, because he didn't have a great playing career. So that gets back to the situation where you've not played at the top level, you've not won at the top level. And Lee Carsley found it difficult because he didn't have that. Well, he obviously played at the top level for Ireland and Everton and teams of the Premier League, but didn't have that ability, that personality, that presence to deliver the job. So I think if you're the England coach, any top coach, you have to be good at your job, but also have the personality and the charisma and the presence to do it.
Just on this course, Mark, you mentioned the cost of it. Presumably part of that is factored in because they get to work with you?
Absolutely.
What were you teaching them?
Well, so the course is that the pro license involves loads of different modules. It's basically, I suppose it's like a master's degree for coaches. If you want to manage the Premier League, you have to have a pro license. So it's coaching modules. It's all sorts of issues around the game, but also part of it is how to deal with the media, because it's a huge part of the game now. So I've done it for 7 or 8 years now, probably even longer actually, and we have to give the cohort, the wannabe coaches, I guess, a kind of a mock press conference. So we do the mock press conference, the post-match press conference. They also have to do a kind of a soft focus, football focus style interview where they have to reveal more themselves, and a post-match flash interview where 2-3 minutes after the game. So in many ways, it's kind of telling coaches what not to say, which doesn't help us in our industry. But they're basically encouraged to find what they call an island. Stay on your island. If there's something controversial happens, don't come off your island. So some of the scenarios that we put to coaches are, one of your players has been accused of racially abusing an opponent. The opponent says that he's going to quit the game if you don't do anything about your play. What are you going to do about it? It's a very difficult situation for a manager to be in, because you have to, first of all, kind of show that you're backing your play without overly backing your play in case he's guilty of racism, while at the same time showing sympathy. So we put coaches through these scenarios. Another one is, you've dropped your star striker. His girlfriend's tweeted at 3 o'clock in the morning that you've lost faith in him. and he's never going to play for you again. And you should be sacked. So difficult scenarios for these coaches to handle. And can you imagine if Mikel Arteta or Ruben Amorim walks into a press conference and he gets one of these questions? They're quite tough to answer. So we have to kind of give them an idea as to what they're going to get. Now, the bonus from our point of view from the media is that we get to tell these prospective coaches the best way to be managers in terms of dealing with the media. Try and engage with the media. Try and not see them as an enemy. Try, give them something, and then they'll give you something back. Build a relationship. So it's difficult at times because obviously a lot of these coaches are now from the generation of players that haven't really been encouraged to speak to the media, or when they have, to give little away. So there is an innate suspicion, I guess, of the media at times, and it's breaking down those barriers. But it is part of the course, and it's over the years there's been a few that have gone through. I think we've done people like Nemanja Vidic, Graham Potter was on a course one year, Steven Gerrard's done it, Wayne Rooney's done it. This time we had Phil Jones was on it, Trevor Sinclair, Sonia Bonpastor was very good in the mock scenarios. Carla Ward, the Republic of Ireland coach, really impressive. So a lot of these coaches are already in work, but some are recently retired players who want to be in work and want to get the coaching qualifications. But just on the cost of it, I think £13,000 for a professional coach or professional footballer is not too kind of straining. The issue for me, and this gets back to the point we were saying before about English coaches, if you're a coach who wants to coach your kids' team and wants to get a qualification and just to show that you're coaching with some sort of expertise, the entry level coach is the B license. That costs £1,200, and it takes 9 to 12 months with the English FA. Now, if you're just a kind of an average, mum or dad who wants to coach your kids' team, £1,200 over 9 to 12 month period, it's a big commitment. I think the FA should maybe look to either half that or do it or fund it themselves. Fund thousands of coaches, to help them start on the way to becoming a coach. Just don't make them pay £1,200 because I think in any time that's a lot of money, but especially in difficult financial times, £1,200 to have the ability to coach your kids, it's just too much.
And you've been doing this, you said, 7 or 8 years.
Yeah.
And we've just lamented the lack of coaches coming through. Well,
yeah,
everybody, there's your answer. Now we know. Well, no Rob Dawson with us this week in the studio because he's in Berlin for something that we'll go in depth next time. Rob, what can you tell us about why you're there?
Well, it's not a holiday before you start having a go at me. It's international break, but I am still working. Working on a feature that hopefully will be out in the next couple of weeks, and hopefully we'll get to talk about on the pod next week.
Bit defensive, that, wasn't it?
A little bit, yeah, very secretive. He's in Berlin. It's the city of subterfuge and espionage and all sorts of strange stuff.
Well, since we were all asked together, Manchester United have announced plans to knock down Old Trafford and build a new 100,000-seater stadium on the same site with 200-metre tall towers and a concourse twice as big as Trafalgar Square. All of this came a day after owner Sir Jim Ratcliffe did broadcast interviews with The Overlap and the BBC, where, amongst other things, he claimed the club would go bust by Christmas and name-check specific first-team players as not good enough. Rob, you were at the launch. Tell us what it was like, especially given it came after these interviews, which generated quite a few headlines by themselves.
Yeah, I mean, it was quite surreal in that sense, because you're right. The 24 hours earlier, Sir Jim Ratcliffe had been all over the news and broadcast stations telling everyone that the club would go bust by Christmas if he hadn't put his own money in. And then suddenly the following day, they're talking about building a stadium that could run to sort of £2 billion. Those two things obviously don't go hand in hand. And, it took an awful lot of kind of explanation from some of the United bosses who were there, Omar Barada in particular, to talk about how this is even possible. Because, while we were all sat in this room looking at these fancy pictures of this new stadium, 100,000-seat stadium in Manchester, quite striking images, once you get down into the detail, there are an awful lot of questions. And the number one question is about finance. How are they going to pay for this? How are they going to pay for this and continue to invest in the squad and get United competing again? Because obviously they aren't at the moment. How long is this going to take? Is this necessary for Man United to be among the top clubs in Europe going forward? That while it was kind of striking to sit in the room and have all these kind of images flashed in your face, there were an awful lot more questions than answers by the end of it.
I thought it was quite interesting that Omar Barada, in one of his interviews, he talked about the way he framed it was, we're pleased to support the government's regeneration plan for the area, which made it sort of pretty transparent that they're relying on government funding to some extent. I mean, how influential, how significant is government or potential taxpayer money going to be to this project?
Well, United are insistent that they aren't going to ask for taxpayer money for the stadium. But you're right, the stadium is part of a wider regeneration project for that area of Manchester. Now, those regeneration projects that the government are looking at haven't been completely signed off. They are looking at Manchester as one of those projects, but you're talking about an awful lot more conversations that have to happen before that's actually a reality. Now, the one key thing that Omar Barada said to us in our briefing after the cameras were switched off was that the stadium doesn't make sense without the wider regeneration project. Now, this isn't United saying we are going to build a stadium regardless of what happens elsewhere. This is United saying we will build a stadium as part of this wider project. And if the wider project doesn't happen, the stadium won't happen. That's essentially what Barada said. Now, he's not specifically asking for taxpayer money for Man United's new stadium because he knows that would go down like a lead balloon. You know, taxpayers in Manchester aren't going to want to fund the stadium, but it has to be according to Barada, it has to be part of this wider project. If the project doesn't happen, the stadium's not going to happen.
I mean, this is part of the thing, isn't it? The government funding is key, but the whole Wembley the North project, which Rich Radcliffe's talking about, it's more than just a stadium. So we've all been to Wembley, and if you look at Wembley 10 years ago when it had just been built, the surrounding area is basically not far of a wasteland. It was car parks. There was nothing there. Now there's residential, there's hotels, there's all sorts of there's retail, and that's the idea that the surrounding area of Old Trafford will become like Wembley is right now, with lots of living space, lots of retail, lots of event places. And that's the idea, that having a stadium there would enable the rest of the area to sustain itself, which, you know, that's their thought process. And I've seen a figure of 17,000 houses or living spaces will be part of this project. Now, if you sell 17,000 housing spaces for an average of £100,000, that's almost £2 billion, which is the cost of the stadium now. So you can see where the numbers come up. But United have stressed, like Rob said, that they aren't expecting the taxpayer to fund the stadium, it's the surrounding area. But there are two contrasting examples in the Premier League. So we've got Man City and West Ham, who are basically playing in taxpayer-funded stadiums at a very low cost to the clubs themselves, rent or just annual costs. And Arsenal-Tottenham. Arsenal, I think they're still paying for the stadium. Well, it certainly took a long time. It crippled the club for a long time.
But they had a property play with that as well.
And Tottenham as well, having to pay for it. So I think what United want to avoid is being in the situation where it's weighing down the club for a long time. A club that's already got £1 billion worth of debt, by the way. But obviously they're not going to get a free stadium like Man City and West Ham did.
Is it possible that... Because one of the things that Arsenal did to sort of fund that move to the Emirates was redevelop their old ground hybrid and turn it into flats and then sell them off. Could United do that, Rob, with Old Trafford?
That's certainly not something that came up in the briefing that we went to in London. I mean, one of the key questions is what happens to Old Trafford. There was a plan at one stage to redevelop Old Trafford and turn that into a 100,000 seat stadium. They decided that was going to be too expensive. So they want to build the stadium on the same site as Old Trafford, but not on the same footprint, which then, leads to questions about what happens to the actual stadium. Now, again, there was plans at one stage to reduce the capacity of Old Trafford, have it as a kind of a youth team stadium or a women's stadium, in the way that City have got a separate stadium on their CFG campus. Again, that was not that because they didn't feel it was cost effective. At the moment, the plan for Old Trafford is to bulldoze it, to keep the historical artifacts that are there, like the Munich clock, parts of the Munich tunnel, even parts of the original tunnel that survived bombing during the Second World War. But apart from that, the plan is to knock it to the ground. But because it's on the same site, you're talking about using the site of Old Trafford as part of this kind of regeneration project, or having it as a plaza for Man United fans, because it's so close. I mean, the plans that we saw, and I have to stress at this point, the plans that we saw are a concept. The images that fans have seen are not necessarily what that stadium is going to look like. It's just a concept right now. But the plans that we saw had the new stadium built right up against Old Trafford, to the point where one of the stands is almost directly behind where the Stretford end is now. And so, you talk in terms of, could you sell it off for housing? Well, probably not, because it is part of the same footprint. And the footprint for a stadium this size is quite small. They're going to have to use every single available bit of space on that site to make these plans come to a reality.
Rob, did they explain at all why they couldn't redevelop Old Trafford in its existing form? Because obviously, Beth's with us and she goes to Anfield all the time, and Liverpool have done a brilliant job of transforming what was a kind of a tired old stadium into one of the best stadiums in Europe. They've stayed where they are. The stadium is now extremely atmospheric, and it's a fantastic situation. I'm sure they'll get the Kenny Dalglish stand done at some point as well. So why couldn't Old Trafford be modernised and upgraded?
Well, a lot of fans would like that because they are traditionalists and they want to play in the same stadium. And I've seen what Liverpool have managed to do with Anfield. What United have said is that the reason they couldn't redevelop Old Trafford is because you would have to knock down so much of it that for a lot of the games or for a lot of time, they would have to play with a reduced capacity. In actual fact, you would probably have to look for somewhere else to play while you were redeveloping Old Trafford. And there just were no other options. You couldn't possibly have United playing at Man City. You couldn't have them playing at Liverpool. There are no other options really in
Rob,
Manchester.
See what they could have done. Right? They could have played at Wembley for 2 years. They could have done a deal with the trains or the bus companies to subsidise travel to Wembley. 80,000 fans every week at Wembley for 2 years. It'd be hard to take, but for 2 years you actually swallow it. Play at Wembley for 2 years, it's subsidised, and then in 2 years' time you got the best stadium in the world on the existing Old Trafford. They could have done that. Absolutely could have done that.
Is there a sense, Rob, from the fans that there is frustration with the sort of the idea of essentially just bulldozing Old Trafford? Because I know, sort of as Mark said, from a Liverpool perspective, I think there is a real relief that the club went down the route of building it, of just redeveloping the stadium rather than moving to a completely different site. And you said there'll be a few features retained, but for the most part, it is going to be a completely new stadium. From speaking to fans and the sense in the United camp, is there a sense of it's a bit of a shame that that's happening?
I think so. I mean, the fact that the club did go through a full consultation process, so they did speak to a lot of fans, and they said that the majority of the fans voted for a new build stadium. Now, I think a lot of Man United fans look at this as a kind of once in a lifetime opportunity. Do you make a really hard choice to knock down Old Trafford and build a fantastic new stadium that kind of meets your commercial needs for the next 100 years, or do you try and put money back into Old Trafford, redevelop it, and get that up to standard? Now, I must say that a lot of the fans voted for that, I think, because the club, from very, very early on, badged it as the best option was to build a new stadium. They told fans that a redevelopment would cost more money, it would take more time, it would probably mean playing games away from Old Trafford, it would probably mean playing games off Old Trafford with a reduced capacity, which would hit their match day revenue and in turn affect PSR. So everything that the club pumped out was aimed at building a new stadium, because really the most important thing about this is what Jim Ratcliffe wants. And Jim Ratcliffe was very, very clear from the minute that he came in that his priority was to build a new stadium. Now, they had to go through that fan consultation because they had to be seen to be speaking to the fans. And obviously the fans have given the club the answer that they wanted. But I can't help think that maybe some of the kind of the narrative around this has led fans to believe that that's what they wanted, and they wanted a new build rather than kind of have a situation where they were redeveloping Old Trafford. But there are still traditionalists who would like it, who would like to stay on the same footprint. And Liverpool have shown that it is possible, because they're going to play in essentially what is a brand new stadium, but on the same site with all the kind of the history that goes along with it.
The sense I get is that the split amongst United fans is there, but I think the majority do seem to want to move. That's the sense I get, because I think they've, like Rob said, they believe, they've seen how tired Old Trafford has got. I mean, it has become a very tired stadium, and I think they're so fed up with it, they want a new stadium. But then, I was at the Bernabeu recently when they played Man City, and it's just an amazing stadium. It's the best stadium in Europe. I'm sure that Barcelona's will be great as well, the new camp. So Barca, Real Madrid and Liverpool have both been able to regenerate their existing stadiums, but there are issues with Old Trafford in terms of the design, and the railway's an issue as well. So I guess, the future is there for Man United to grasp. But the issue is, if you're a Man United fan, would you trust the current ownership, so Jim Ratcliffe, the Glazers, to get this right?
Well, speaking of that, Rob, I did want to touch on the interviews that Jim Ratcliffe has done, because I've been long sort of arguing that owners should do more, right? We don't hear enough from the owners of clubs. I spoke to Josh Kroenke last summer, but that was a product of a couple of years of trying to convince Arsenal and the Kroenkes to do it. What did you make of the interviews that he gave? Because from my sort of take on it from afar was, on one hand, you sort of think, well, fair play to him. he didn't seem to think that any topic was off limits. But then some of the answers were quite alarming in sort of revealing perhaps some fuzzy thinking or lack of clarity on certain things. What did you make of it, Rob?
I mean, you've made a good point there that a lot of football fans will say that they want communication from their owners. And it's one of the big criticisms of the Glazers that when they came in 2005, they said they were going to communicate and they never did. So you can't fault Sir Jim Ratcliffe getting in front of the cameras and taking questions. So that's the first thing. You can't criticise him for doing it. Beyond that, I agree. I thought some of the answers were a little bit strange. He is in a difficult position in that lots of Man United fans will understand that the reason United are in this financial mess is the Glazers. Well, the Glazers are Sir Jim Ratcliffe's business partner, and he can't be seen to go on camera and start slaughtering his business partner. I think everyone could understand why that is a very, very difficult position for him to be in. When he starts talking about the squad, I didn't think it was particularly advisable to start talking about the likes of Onana, Højlund, Casemiro as players that they're still playing for in the summer, as a kind of way to point at these players and say, look at the mess we've kind of inherited, look at the players we're having to deal with. He said this in what essentially was United's biggest week of the season against ahead of that Real Sociedad game in the Europa League. So in terms of what that did to the dressing room and squad morale, Amorim said it didn't matter, but I can't help but think that the players must have looked at and thought, really, is that really the best thing you can be saying?
I disagree on that, Rob. I think that, as we know, I think we've both reported on this, the situation United face in the summer with the financial matters, and a lot of fans just don't believe it. They don't believe that United are in a position, and I think you explained perfectly that before we spend a penny this summer, we've got to spend £87 million re-signing these players that we paid for.
I thought it was incredible that he just gave that number out.
Well, exactly.
Because that is sensitive information
I suppose
that now every
book.
Club has got. That they know that if United are in the market for a player or they're trying to buy one of United's players, they know that figure's really key to what they can spend.
It's no secret. It's amortisation, isn't it? They break down the length of the contract. I mean, you can work out what they owe, but to put it like that to the fans know the situation. And I have no problem with him saying that they've overpaid for underperforming players, because it's true. Some of the players in that dressing room, and they don't need protecting. They need to be kind of exposed for being that not delivering what they should be delivering. Now, I'm not saying it's Rasmus Højlund's fault that he's not good enough, because he didn't ask the club to pay close to £70 million for him, but he's there. I know he scored at the weekend, but he's underperformed and they overpaid for him. So he's only being honest. And yes, you're right, Rob, in the sense that it might not do well for the dressing room, but tough. Players have got to take it. To play for Man United, the expectations are really high. And if the owner says you're not delivering, well, if you're not delivering, he didn't say that about Bruno Fernandes. He praised him because Bruno Fernandes has delivered. So the simple equation is deliver, live up to your price tag and your wages, and you won't get criticised.
I think that the slightly alarming thing for me from the outside looking in, and I suppose that is the extension of it. And I do take your point, and I think, it is right. Sometimes fans call out players all the time. So the owners who have invested an awful lot of money in them should be well within the rights to be honest. And like you say, they shouldn't be coddled because, because you don't want to hurt the feelings. I do completely take that. But obviously, having done a fair bit on the women's side of the game, his comments sort of consistently about the women's team for me have been alarming. And I completely take the point that it is way down his list of priorities, and that, maybe doesn't marry with sort of the ecosystem that we're in now, where we want equality. I understand that obviously the men's team come first, and the women's team is probably dependent a little bit on the success of the club in a wider sense. But it seems like he does sometimes speak without thinking, and you think for someone who is, in charge of one of the biggest football institutions in the world, he surely must have a team of PR people around him. So he's either not being well advised in that way, or he's not heeding that advice, which for me, if I was a United fan, would be a little bit of a worry.
Well, I know he was advised not to speak about the Glazers,
right,
and he kind of stayed to that a little bit, but I think he said a couple of things about the Glazers which kind of hint at what he really thinks, but he cleverly shifted the finger points at the Glazers to saying that the regimes of Ed Woodward and Richard Arnold were really bad. He said he wouldn't have kept Arnold or Woodward, and they were both appointed by the Glazers, so, take your pick.
Rob, final word to you, I think. Obviously, the mood around United has not been great for the majority of this season, if not all of it. Do you think this stadium announcement is going to change that a little bit? Is it going to create a bit of positivity that maybe Ruben Amorim and his players can feed off and try and finish the season on a high? Or is it just a completely different sort of matter altogether?
I think it's fair to say that the fans are split in terms of what the actual stadium looks like, but not the premise on which it's based. And so for an owner to come out and say, we are wanting to put United back among the best clubs in Europe, and this is what we need to do it, I think that suggestion has been welcomed. That along with the money that's gone into Carrington to rebuild their training facility. All of these little things go down very, very well with fans. Now, you can get into the kind of nuts and bolts on whether the stadium looks nice or whether it doesn't, whether we're actually going to see it or not. But the one thing that Jim Radcliffe has done is kind of point towards what should be a brighter future. Now, that doesn't marry particularly with what's happening on the field because, United are still in the bottom half of the table. I think that the last couple of results have done wonders for Ruben Amorim, getting into the quarterfinals of the Europa League, beating Leicester. You can start to see a little bit of progress on the field when you start coupling that with what fans are hoping will be sort of progress off the field. Then there is kind of room to be optimistic. The only thing I would say about all of this is that it's talk, and we've seen United talk, and United are the best club in the world at talking, but not necessarily about doing. And so United fans want to see progress on the pitch with Ruben Amorim. They want to see progress in terms of recruitment in the summer with the players that they bring in, the players that they are able to get rid of. And they also want to see a shovel in the ground at Old Trafford and work starting on a new stadium. Because at the moment, all of this, Sir Jim Radcliffe, Ruben Amorim, all of it is talk. When it starts becoming action, then United fans can really kind of start getting behind it and start, looking towards what is a brighter future. Because at the moment, it does feel a little bit sort of doom and gloom. There are clubs all over Europe who are miles ahead of them. So United need to start making good decisions, taking small steps and moving forward. I think that's what United fans will settle for at the moment.
All right, Rob. Well, Auf Wiedersehen. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you back in the studio soon. Well, this week we'll finish with Wrexham, who picked up an important win over fellow League One promotion chasers Wycombe at the weekend. Birmingham City are the runaway leaders of League One and look like they'll go straight back up to the Championship after spending around £25 million on transfers. Wrexham, by comparison, spent £4 million. Mark, this shows that if Wrexham do get promoted to the Championship, it would be unlikely, would you say, that they can get back-to-back promotions?
I think so. I don't really want to put a bucket of cold water on it because the Wrexham story is incredible. I mean, just over 2 years ago, I was at Wrexham when they were promoted from the National League, which is the 5th tier, and that in itself was an achievement. So the idea that Wrexham could be a Premier League team when we get back from the World Cup next year seems ridiculous, but it's possible because if they win promotion this year, they're in the promotion slot. I have to say that we come out the day after Wycombe play away at Rotherham, so Wycombe could reclaim second spot. But Wrexham are really in the running for promotion to the Championship. So if they are in the Championship next season, they're one promotion away from the Premier League. And other clubs, as we know, Ipswich right now are playing the Premier League, having achieved back-to-back promotions. So it has been done. But I've been speaking to people this week, and the sense of Wrexham doing it, this feels like if they get promotion this year, a reality check needs to come in the sense that they have to have a bit more patience because Ipswich built their squad for promotion from League One by signing good Championship players, and that enabled them when they're in the Championship to go straight through again. Man City did it in 2000, Watford did it, Norwich and Southampton have also done it. I think if it's going to happen this time with Birmingham spent, like say, £25 million. They spent £12 million on a striker in League One. So from Wrexham's perspective, doing it again would be really, really hard. Also, you have to factor in that Ipswich, I think their average attendance is 29,000, similar at Birmingham. Wrexham's capacity right now is 13,000. So all of the...
Bournemouth,
yeah, but obviously, Bournemouth think go back to back. I think that's the issue. Bournemouth Stadium is very small, and I think people forget that Bournemouth have got quite wealthy backers. But still, they've done it. Eddie Howe was part of the decline from the bottom division. I mean, I think Bournemouth are the example. I think Luton as well. Luton did it in 9 years from the National League to the Premier League. But they probably climbed too soon in 9 years because I think right now they're in the relegation slots in the Championship, having been relegated from the Premier League last season. So it's a massive leap from League One to the Premier League. And I think that's where Wrexham have to kind of be mindful of the fact that they don't own the training ground yet. The stadium is in need of redevelopment still. The main stand is basically what it has been for the last 30 years. So what happens? Do they go up and then do they chase the dream? Because, I mean, can you imagine Rob Reynolds? Who's Rob Reynolds?
Rob Reynolds.
He's the new signing. Ryan Reynolds and Rob.
We didn't have the rights to Ryan Reynolds.
Yeah, Ryan Reynolds and Rob McElhenney, as we know, have really capitalised on the story by the the documentary that we see, Welcome to Wrexham. What a story it would be next season, Welcome to Wrexham, chasing the Premier League. 'Cause I imagine if that's the case, they will do all they can to throw money at it. And if you're a player that plays in the Premier League right now and Wrexham are promoted, it would be a very appealing move to go to Wrexham.
You mentioned sort of throwing money at it though, and obviously they have thrown money at the club over the last few years, and that has not made them particularly popular in some quarters of English football. But they're now getting to a point where some of the ownership in the Premier League. I mean, some clubs are state owned. It's inconceivable wealth for all of the fact that Ryan Reynolds and Rob McElhenney have incredible wealth. It's not quite at that level. So do you think it will get to a point where all of a sudden they won't suddenly look like the richest men in the room, I guess?
I think that what they will probably do is look to attract more investors, and I think that's already started to happen. Actually, they've made no secret of the fact they can't keep, I think, throwing money into a fire is what one of them said. The last financial figures which came out 11 months ago, they doubled their commercial revenue to £10 million. So we're expecting their figures again in the next few weeks, really. And I imagine they're going to show another rise. They make commercially much more than anybody in that division because of what they can do, because of the Rob and Ryan factor. That we've got a graphic behind the sponsored by United Airlines. It's a League One club with a global airline that sponsors them. So they have the ability to commercially develop, the club even further. But again, one of the points I spoke to Stuart Webber, who was the sporting director at Norwich, when they, were promoted to the Premier League. What Wrexham have done, when they were in the National League, they spent big by bringing players in from League One. People like Paul Mullin, Elliot Lee, players that were really key to their promotion from the National League. And they were too good for that division, and they were too good for League One, but now they're at their level of League One. But can they make the step to the Championship? Because what Birmingham have done and what Ipswich did before them, they signed players that were ready to make the step, that were, again, that were too good for the division they're in. You can't really say with the Wrexham squad they are too good for the division they're in. They're at the par of their level now. They just spent £1 million on Jay Rodriguez from Burnley in the January window, and £2 million their club record signing on Sam Smith from Reading. So it's not quite the same as what Birmingham have done. So if Wrexham are promoted, they would start next season with a squad of players, many of whom were there in the National League. And I don't think you can make that leap. I mean, I know Luton did it with, I think one of their players had gone all the way through the whole pyramid with them. But Wrexham would basically need to sign, I think, 5 or 6 players at Championship level at best, at least, to take them up. And can they do that with a ground that's too small for the club right now, with money needed to rebuild the stadium, with money needed to, I guess, buy their own training ground? It would be a huge leap in the wages that it would take in that division. And we know, I mean, the Championship is, Sheffield Wednesday, Leeds, Sheffield United, potentially Birmingham, huge clubs, big city clubs with the ability to make much more through the gate and the turnstiles than Wrexham can right now.
Yeah, look, they need to get promoted first, right? But I mean, you'd sort of think in the evolution of the club, a sort of season of consolidation in the Championship would probably be the best way to go. I mean, I've always been quite sort of approached this with a degree of cynicism, I think, the sort of marketing element of all this. But I did go to a Wrexham game in Chapel Hill in America because Chelsea played them in the pre-season a couple of years ago, and you sort of. I mean, pre-season games are always a bit strange, aren't they? But I wasn't really sure what to expect, given it was Wrexham. There were more Wrexham fans in the stadium than Chelsea fans. It was, and we're talking like a 40-odd thousand seater stadium. This is not a small sample size. It was remarkable the impact they had, and that was 2 years ago or 18 months ago.
They've hired a new CEO who used to work at Inter Milan, and I think their head of media is now used to work at UEFA. So they are building for a much bigger future. But I can't believe that when Rob and Ryan bought the club 3-4 years ago, that they listen, their dream was to get out of the National League, and I think they did that. And I think that was always an achievable objective. They could never have dreamed of a straight run through to the Premier League, even a 10-year plan. But that's the situation they're at now, and it is going to cost them a lot more money. And I think they have to be mindful of the fact that the Championship is a huge leap. But you talk about consolidation, momentum is also a key thing, isn't it? And selling a story of consolidation this year, it's not really the same as let's chase the Premier League. But that's where the dangers come, isn't it? A club like Wrexham, can they sustain that pursuit of an impossible dream on the back of 2 very wealthy owners? But you have to be able to support it. There has to be some sort of foundation in place that if they ever move on or go away, that you can sustain it. And I think we've seen lots of clubs in the Premier League that they reach the top and then it's too much too soon, and they drop back, and they really suffer for it.
Well, we'll keep a watchful eye on Wrexham over the coming weeks. Thanks for tuning in. We'll be back next week on Wednesday. See you then.